This is Reginald, Perryman, real estate broker here in the Michigan area. Today I'm going to explain to you the benefits and the pros and cons of using and selling your home via land contract terms, whether you're an investor or a private home seller that are looking to sell your home using an alternative. Alright, so let's look at land contracts and exactly what a land contract is. So basically, a land contract is just really another way of seller financing, where you have the buyers basically giving you a down payment and paying you monthly payments over a period of time until the property is paid off. So the unique thing about a land contract is that it's actually recorded as a legal document, just like you would a deed or a mortgage, but the ownership shows a little different. Whereas if you're doing seller financing, or you're offering a seller's mortgage, or you're getting a mortgage from a lender, the buyer actually receives the deed at closing. With the land contract, the actual land contract and or land contract memorandum is recorded, and it shows the buyer as having ownership rights, meaning that they own the property, and the seller still has an interest in the property via the land contract document. So on record, the owner would be the buyer, but there's an ownership interest in the property via a land contract. Now let's talk about the pros and cons of a land contract. So one of the best things is, as a seller, you can earn interest over the term of the contract. So let's say you receive, you're doing a land contract for $100,000. The buyer gives you 20% down, and your balance is $80,000. Well, here in the Michigan area, the highest interest rate you can charge at this time is 11%. So you can negotiate the interest rate with the potential buyer, and that interest that you accumulate over time is extra income, basically. Seller has little to no responsibility for the property, and again, this has a lot to do with what you negotiate in a land contract. So for example, here the seller has an option to escrow taxes and insurance, so meaning that you can have the buyer, the homeowner, pay taxes and insurance, or you can include it in the monthly payments, and the seller would be responsible for paying the balance due every year. When you negotiate the deal, unlike a mortgage, there's no appraisal that's required, only if the buyer negotiates and they want to have an appraisal completed to help determine if the property is being sold at a fair market value. Seller determines the buyer's ability to qualify and pay. So pretty much the decision is up to you if you decide to accept a potential buyer for the property. So for example, if a buyer doesn't qualify under traditional lender requirements, so for example, FHA has a 29% or 41% income to debt ratio. Let's say the buyer is self-employed and they don't have bank statements, for example, or they don't have at least 2 years of tax returns, but this is a business owner that makes quite a bit of money, and you can see it by looking at their bank statements. Affording your home is not an issue, and you can make the judgment call as to if you want to qualify this person or not to purchase your home. The terms and payments can be flexible and negotiated, so pretty much if you are working with the buyer, you can negotiate the monthly payment so that it pays off in 5 years, 10 years, or 30 years if you choose to. It's up to you and the buyer based on whatever you negotiate. Now keep in mind, the state has current laws that you have to follow, and none of this is to be considered legal advice, so consult with your real estate attorney or your attorney in regards to how to structure your land contract and what laws you have to follow. Now, some of the disadvantages of a land contract is, of course, if the buyer forfeits, then you're going to have some eviction and foreclosure costs based on how your land contract is structured, and you're going to have some attorney fees, so on and so forth. The land contract cannot be sold if you have a due on sale clause in your current mortgage. So basically what that means is if you owe a balance, let's say you're selling your home for $200,000 and your balance is, $180,000. If the buyer is giving you $20,000 down, the current balance on your mortgage has to be paid at the time of the sale of the property if you have a due on sale clause in your current mortgage. So make sure that you're checking your mortgage clause, or just contact your lender and they'll tell you. Most lenders do not want you to give ownership of any kind to a third party unless they approve it, if you have a balance due on that property, unless you're going to pay the property off, and then you can pretty much sell it for what you want and how you want to sell the property. All right, so now we're going to go over just a quick, now this is not, this is just a sample land contract. Just want to show you pretty much the format and some of the language that's in the land contract. And then this is the document that will actually be recorded. Now there is also a land contract memorandum that will not, that will be recorded in place of the actual land contract, if in fact you don't want all the details of the land contract itself being placed in public record. So some buyers, for example, don't want a public record of what the interest rate is they pay and things of that nature. So there's a one-page document called a land contract memorandum, which lets the county know who's the buyer and who's the seller and who has interest in the land contract. It has some other details, but this is a sample of a land contract. Want to point out a few things. Of course, general information, property location, tax ID number, terms of payment. It has monthly payments spelled out, the date that the payments are due, the number of years in which the land contract, so basically the term of the land contract, the start date of the first payment. Typically, the seller is going to convey a warranty deed on a land contract. The seller can convey a quitclaim deed, but that's negotiated with buyer and seller. So basically, typically what happens is if you're closing with a title company or escrow company, the actual deed is signed by the seller and held in escrow. Once the buyer at the end of the contract shows proof, or buyer and seller complete the term of the land contract, basically the title company will release that warranty deed and record it with the county. That's the safest way for a buyer to protect themselves, because there has been times where the buyer has paid the land contract in full and was unable to locate the seller to sign the warranty deed, or maybe something happened to the seller and it passed down to a family member, whatever the case may be. It's always best to have the actual warranty deed held in escrow with the title company. All right. This just provides a clause for title insurance, purchaser's duties. So basically it says what the buyer is responsible for. They have to maintain the property, and it has other stipulations here. There's also stipulation as to who's responsible for paying the taxes and insurance. And again, just like in your mortgage, if you don't pay your taxes and insurance, the buyer is considered in default, depending on how you word your land contract. You can also ask the seller pay the taxes and insurance. You can choose to add it to the balance or increase the monthly payment. You have to word the land contract to cover yourself as the seller, and the buyer has to make sure they're covered as well. So it has to be fair, and it also has to be negotiated. Alternate payment method. In addition to that, you can say you can negotiate with the buyer to make additional payments throughout the year. This is an escrow clause. So for example, if the payments are $1,500 with just principal and interest, if the buyer says, I want my payments to include taxes and insurance, and the taxes and insurance come up to approximately $300 extra per month, the buyer would pay you $1,800 per month. You would just put in an extra $300 here, stating that that money is going to be set aside in escrow to cover any taxes and insurance when they become due. There's different clauses in here, but we're going to go over, here's the clause for non-payment of taxes, disposition of insurance proceeds. So this is very important. So for example, if the property was to catch fire or have any damage, this explains what happens to the proceeds. Typically what happens first is the proceeds are used to repair the damage to the property. Most insurance companies will issue a check to both buyer and seller, unless you contact them together and have some type of agreement to pay the contractors directly. This is to ensure that the property is repaired up to the current building code standards, and that the buyer doesn't take the money and run and leave you with a damaged property, and vice versa. Assignment by the purchaser, so only if you, and you'll have to read this, but basically the purchaser can assign their interest with your approval. Possession of the property clause, acceleration clause, and this is a clause basically if there's any default, you can accelerate the land contract, and there's a right to forfeit here as well. So basically all this has to do with non-payment. If, for example, the buyer hasn't paid you and you start the, pretty much the foreclosure process, and it explains when you can start that process. This explains notice to purchasers, additional clauses, dower rights if any. And again, each state is different, and I would recommend that you talk to your legal counsel, have an attorney or a title company prepare your land contract according to the state laws, as well as what you and the buyer negotiate. Again, this document has to be notarized and signed by all parties, just like in this case, a deed only has to be signed by the seller, but in this case, this document has to be signed by both parties and notarized. Now, this particular form can be recorded, or you can draft a separate land contract memorandum to show public record of who the buyer and seller was on the contract. So now we're going to discuss some of the other benefits, and that's the interest that you can earn as mentioned earlier. So for this example, we're going to use a $200,000 sale in which the buyer put 10% down, leaving a principal balance of $180,000. Now keep in mind, as of today in the state of Michigan, the highest interest rate you can charge is 11%. So again, that interest rate is negotiable between you and the potential buyer for this property. So you can make your terms, you can make it 60 months, 5 years, or 180 months. So it's up to you, whatever you negotiate. So I'm going to give you one example at a 6% interest rate with 180 months as far as the term. We're going to calculate here. That gives a monthly payment of $1,518, so just over $1,500. But what I want you to notice here is the total amount repaid. So again, this is a home that you're selling for $200,000 with 10% down. You're going to earn over this term, you're going to earn over $93,000 in interest. So that's a huge benefit to selling with seller financing and or land contract. So let's use another example. Let's say the buyer can only afford to pay, or you guys negotiate to pay just $1,000 per month with the same term of 180 months. And let's calculate that. So that's going to leave a balloon balance of $151,000. you're going to see that the interest paid is going to actually increase because they're paying less towards the principal on a monthly basis. So here, you decrease the monthly payment by approximately $500, but you're going to double the amount of interest that you receive. So again, this is based on 180 months. And then in addition to that, there's a balloon payment due at the end. So just keep in mind whatever you negotiate here. So let's say if the buyer wants to pay more money under 180 months, same interest rate, actually it's going to pay off a lot sooner than the 180 months. So if you look here, it's actually going to pay off in 119 months. So this is where it benefits the buyer. A lot less interest is paid. Only $39,000 in interest is paid by paying an extra $500. So that extra $500 a month, if they pay more, they're going to save almost half in interest. Well, yeah, just under half in interest. If they pay $500 less with the $1,000 per month payment, their interest is going to double that they pay you. So keep that in mind when you're negotiating. Also talk to your accountant or your CPA about the benefits of selling a home on an installment payment versus, let's say if you're an investor and you brought the property to flip it. So if I paid $100,000 for this property and I put $20,000 to rehab it into it and I sold it for $200,000, now I have a $80,000 profit and I'm paying taxes on that profit. So as your accountant, if you were to sell this property for $200,000 with an $80,000 profit, and going back to this scenario, in addition to that $80,000 profit, you now have an additional $93,000 in interest paid. So let's say, for example, you don't want to wait 15 years. Let's say you just want to pay it off in 5 years. That payment goes up to $34.79. You're still going to make $28,000 in interest over the course of those 5 years. And again, let's say the buyer only wants to pay $1,500 for that same term. You're going to make $48,000 in interest, but there's going to be a balloon balance at the end of the 5 years. So that's the difference between making an $80,000 profit in the scenario that we gave, or an additional $48,000 spread out over 5 years. And when you talk to your CPA about the benefits of selling a property via installment payments and how it's going to affect your capital gain taxes, you'll see some benefits there. So again, this is a great way to sell your property, especially if you're in a market where financing may become a little tight and things of that nature for buyers. And as the market is going to shift a little bit here, or if interest rates go up, then this can be an option to secure other buyers. And keep in mind, most buyers that are looking to buy on land contract are usually have pretty good credit. In most cases, they just don't meet lender requirements regarding income to debt ratio or the time on their job, or they may be self-employed and they don't fit into some of the traditional programs that a lender has. Now, one of the other options here is that let's say in this scenario, you're going to make $48,000 in interest. The balance is $180,000. As the seller, you can assign your interest to a third party, and someone will buy this balance from you. In other words, to put it in simple terms, just like when the banks sell notes and things of that nature, or they assign their interest to another servicer or another bank. So someone may pay you $200,000, considering that they're going to make an additional $48,000 in interest, or they may negotiate to pay you less than the $180,000. You're going to get your cash up front. You have a paying buyer, and again, the goal here is to make the interest on the money as well. If you have any questions, feel free to visit me at regiusrealestate.com.